The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to Urban Fantasist, your fortnightly fix of weird tales, urban legends, magic, and folklore. And now here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to Urban Fantasist. I'm your host Charles Christian, and with me is Janie. Hi Janie.
Hi Charles, and a big hello to all our listeners. Glad you could make it.
As this is our first episode, I think I should explain the show has a magazine format, so along with news, features and interviews, we'll also have some regular slots like On This Weird Day in History, Urban Myth Busting and our top 10 lists. We're starting our top 10 with the top 10 ways the world might end, though hopefully not before midnight tonight.
I wonder if you should also explain those cryptic references in our intro to Hangman's Hill and Misery Corner?
Yeah, good point. Hangman's Hill. It's about half a mile away from our studio. It's a mound near the earthworks of an old Norman castle. Legend has it the Norman barons would dispense justice there, and anyone found guilty would soon find themselves swinging from the gibbet on Hangman's Hill. Then, just a quarter of a mile the other direction, we have Misery Corner. As for Misery Corner, that's just a quarter of a mile the other way, and it's haunted by the ghost of a young servant girl. Legend has it that during the 17th century she worked at one of the houses on the corner and committed suicide by drowning herself after she became pregnant and had been abandoned by her lover. For the technically minded ghost hunters out there, she's classified as a residual or stone tapes type ghost, not so much a spirit as a playback of a traumatic event in her short life, almost like a videotape. Anyway, let's get on with the show, and appropriately enough, given the story about Misery Corner, we start with a haunting and a possible murder.
Ooh, I love a good ghost story. Tell me more.
So to that ghost haunting we promised you. The location is Rainthorpe Hall, near Tasburg in South Norfolk, and the haunting takes place in the early evening of the 8th of September. It's an annual recurring haunting. It takes the form of a ghostly pair meeting in the gardens of the hall. The woman of the couple is Amy Robsart, and the man is either John Appleyard, her half-brother, or Robert Dudley, her husband. The date of the manifestation is incidentally the day Amy died after falling down the staircase at Cumnor Place, a large house near Oxford, on the 8th of September 1560. I should just add that Rainthorpe Hall is a Grade 1 Elizabethan manor house, and please note it is a private house not open to the public, not even open to ghost hunters. Well, unless you're prepared to stamp up the £3 million asking price the owners were looking for the last time the property was on the market. As Amy's family home was actually a few miles away, near Wymondham, also in Norfolk, we can only assume her shade chooses to haunt Rainthorpe because it was the place she encountered great happiness during her all-too-short life. She died when she was only 28 years old. So who was Amy, and why should we care anyway? Amy Robsart, better known as Amy Dudley, was the first wife of Lord Robert Dudley, who subsequently became the Earl of Leicester. They lived together for many years quite happily. However, upon the accession of Elizabeth I in late 1558, Dudley became the Master of the Horse, which was an important office at the royal court. The Queen soon fell in love with Dudley. There were even rumours that she had a child by him later on, and there was talk that Amy Dudley, who did not follow her husband to court, was suffering from an illness, possibly breast cancer, and that Elizabeth was merely waiting for her to die so that she could marry Dudley. The rumours were further reinforced by the fact that Elizabeth remained single when, as Queen of England, there were plenty of foreign suitors from royal families in Europe asking her to marry her. Amy Dudley lived with her friends in the in Oxford, in a different part of the country, and rarely saw her husband after 1558. On the morning of the 8th of September 1560, she insisted on sending her servants to go off and visit the local Abingdon fair without her. However, when they returned, they found her dead at the foot of the flight of stairs, with a broken neck and 2 wounds to the head. The subsequent coroner's jury finding was that she had died of a fall downstairs. The verdict was misfortune or accidental death. However, that was not the end of the matter. Amy Dudley's death caused a scandal. Despite the inquest's outcome, Dudley was widely suspected of having been involved in her death. Although he remained one of Elizabeth's closest favourites for the rest of his life, the damage to his reputation meant Elizabeth couldn't risk marrying him. There are 3 possible explanations for the death. The first was because Amy was quite clearly lonely and hadn't seen her husband for a couple of years, and she no doubt knew of the rumours about his relationship with the Queen. There is a possibility of suicide. However, as she was a devout Protestant and suicide was regarded as a mortal sin, this is probably unlikely. The second explanation was that it was a genuine accident. There's been a suggestion that because of her breast cancer, it could have damaged the bones in her neck, with the result that if she did fall down the stairs, the fall would be fatal, whereas anyone else might have survived it. However, there continues to be the rumour that one of Robert Dudley's followers, a man called Sir Richard Verney, either poisoned her, which caused her to collapse and fall down the stairs, or else pushed her down the stairs and caused her death. The mystery hasn't been solved after 450 years, and it looks like it never now will be. However, we still have a reminder every year on the 8th of September when her ghost walks at Rainthorpe Hall.
My money says poor Amy was murdered. Anyway, Amy's ghost makes its annual appearance tomorrow night, but in the meantime, what events happened in the past on this weird day in history, the 7th of September?
Let's start with a birth. On the 7th of September 1795, the English physician and author John William Polidori was born. A friend of the poets Lord Byron and Percy Shelley, Polidori is credited as the creator of the vampire genre in fantasy fiction. His best-known story is The Vampire, with a Y, which was published in 1819. Now, interestingly, Polidori wrote the draft of this when he, along with Byron Shelley and Mary Shelley, were staying at the Villa Diodati on Lake Geneva. The weather was terrible, so they couldn't do any outside activities, so on one stormy night, Byron challenged everyone to write a ghost story. Polidori wrote The Vampire, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, and Byron wrote some ghost stories about Newstead Abbey, his home in England.
Next up, it's year 1813, and a story is not so much weird as an intriguing piece of American folklore. This is because it's the first use of the nickname of Uncle Sam to refer to the United States. The name is linked to Samuel Wilson. He was a meat packer from Troy, New York State, who supplied barrels of beef marked US to the United States Army during the War of 1812. Apparently, someone asked this guy, Sam Wilson, what US meant, and he said, Uncle Sam.
Of course, there are some spoilsports who claim this is fake news, as this story about Sam Wilson didn't appear in print until nearly 30 years later. And there again, there's some other people who say it's fake news because there was a version of the song Yankee Doodle Dandy being sung 30 years previously, which included a reference to Uncle Sam. But now on to a death, when on the 7th of September 2003, it was announced the American singer-songwriter Warren Zevon had died. He's best known in the UK for his 1978 hit Werewolves of London, which earns him his mention on this programme.
Ah, that track, yes. Did you know that listeners to the BBC once voted that song as having the best opening verse of any pop song? Yeah, it goes, saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand walking through the streets of Soho in the rain. He was looking for a place called Lee Ho Fook's, going to get a big dish of beef chow mein. Ah, woo, werewolves of London. Something like that. Anyway, do you remember it?
I do. I'm just old enough to remember that song. My mother used to play it to me. Right, finally, Janie, I bet you're dying to know what happened on the 7th of September 1752.
Ah, funny you should say that. I've often find myself lying awake at night worrying about that question. Not. OK, go on. What actually happened on the 7th of September 1752?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing at all. This was because that September was the point in history when England and what was then the British Empire, which for our North American listeners also includes what is now the United States and Canada, chose to switch from the old-style Julian calendar to the newer Gregorian one. This is the one we still use today. Because the Julian calendar wasn't really very good at handling leap years, there was some catching up to do. This meant that when people went to bed on Wednesday the 2nd of September, when they got up the following day, it was Thursday the 14th of September. Not surprisingly, there were a few people complaining and demanding that the government give us back our 11 days.
Oh, so what happened if it was your birthday during that time or your payday?
No presents and no pay, though I suppose you do have the consolation that you're 1 year younger than you would have been.
Ah. You're listening to Urban Fantasist with Charles Christian on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
We're now going to be speaking to Rob Lancashire. Rob Lancashire's an old friend of mine. He's also a tech entrepreneur and a lover of all things science fiction, science fact, and he also has a wicked surrealist sense of humour. Rob, with your tech hat on, what do you think of these stories about Silicon Valley billionaires spending their money on land and equipment and generally prepping for Doomsday? Do you think they know something about the tech that we don't know, or are they just jumping on the bandwagon?
Good morning, Charles. That's a really good question. I come live from digging a hole in my back garden. I've been reading about these stories and they make me smile. If anything, I think, do these guys know something we don't? You just look at it and you think they've got such a privileged position. They're so terrified of it being taken away from them that they are trying to assuage their own fears by sort of doing all of these things and worrying about it. It's a very, very, if anything, one of the sort of the biggest pointers for me was around the a comment from a guy called Steve Huffington, who is the CEO of Reddit. And in a sense, this fits because he said in the event of a Doomsday event, he thinks he's quite a good leader. And so he would be one of the ones in charge after the event. And as such, he would at least be one of the leaders and not one of the slaves. That's his quote. And, that makes me feel so wonderful that at least we'll know that, in a post-apocalyptic world, we'll have someone who can, organise a really good conversation. That's the main thing. As such a good leader, and I think in a sense that kind of for me, fits it all together. Is these guys just so privileged, and maybe they suffer from a bit of imposter syndrome, and as such, they're terrified someone's going to take it away in an apocalypse.
Yeah, and of course, when we talk about the tech industry, we have to remember they got the Y2K scenario in year 2000 disastrously wrong.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some poor guy somewhere on the line, some programmer realised that there was a bug in his code, mentioned it to someone, and then marketing department got hold of it and thought, hello, we can make some money out of this by terrifying everybody that the world was about to end. It's not unlike the current situation we have with AI today.
Yeah.
But there's this been spun very, very well.
Yes, well, I mean, talking of that, today's the time we're recording this interview, today's Daily Telegraph has a headline, "It's a robot's world. Will the march of the machines make us all redundant?" And it's interesting that
absolutely
AI and robots are now one of the major doomsday scenarios. But is that likely at all?
Well, I suppose if we parallel it back to the last great industrial revolution, when people were inventing sort of devices, back to Caractacus Potts type devices, which would in the morning, boil an egg. I'm not entirely convinced that the machines. Machines are still very literal. They don't have the rationality of humans. So, yes, if a machine's able to behave, and do a certain task, and do one particular task very well, then yes. And if that's killing other humans, then I suppose yes, that could be a problem. But however, the likelihood of that. Well, who knows? But I think one of the key things about this is anybody that's ever been or has been around technology for long enough will know that the technology is always based on a programmer, which means that somewhere along the line, as maybe a robot's about to, execute large numbers of people, almost certainly something's going to pop up saying, there's been a problem with your process, going to shut down now.
Yes, Windows would like to upgrade your operating system.
Exactly, that's it. Yeah, or suddenly it'll go blue and fall over.
Yeah. Going through some of the tech-oriented doomsday scenarios, another popular one, which has been around since Orson Welles in the 1930s, is the invasion by aliens. Now, you're a big fan of science fiction. How likely do you think this is?
Are aliens going to turn up? You have to ask yourself, what would they do? What possible use would they get apart from maybe some really good coffee? Yes. And that's obviously after the apocalypse, when all of the CEOs arrive out of their bunkers, and obviously will need to have a really good coffee shop chain to get their morning hit of espresso. Yes,
well, that's one of the things I look forward to when the dust settles after Doomsday and the billionaire preppers crawl from the wreckage. We can also look forward to plenty of microbreweries producing a really nice craft beer.
Oh, absolutely, yes, and lots of artisan stuff, definitely. Lots of artisan stuff, very much, yeah.
Moving on the scenarios, there's another one called a coronal mass ejection, which is basically where the sun gives out a huge EMP pulse and destroys all our communications and electrical grids and causes a worldwide blackout. This does seem like a script from the original Independence Day movie, but that would certainly be a major problem for us, and again for our billionaire preppers of social media companies and app developers, because no one will be able to take and post selfies anymore. But is that a viable issue?
Well, absolutely. It would be the end of the world, certainly for my daughter, if she didn't have Instagram anymore, so that she could post pictures of our dog on it, which is always important, particularly for our dog's current social standing. In a sense, I think nature is more likely to be the cause of our demise, or certainly a mass extinction. Certainly a certain, as it's already been, has the power to wipe out large numbers of us, and particularly the coronal mass ejection. I think it's something like a 12% probability of it happening between 2012 and 2022. So that's a reasonably high. I think that's 1 in 8 chance of it happening. That's a reasonably high probability. And the last one, major one in 1859, was what took out most of the fledgling US telegraph system. Right. Started fires, and rather amusingly, it also electrocuted a number of wireless operators. So that would be quite entertaining. If anything, though, the most important thing that it would do is it would end Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
And as my daughter has already worked out, if you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the bottom, the basic needs such as water, food, warmth, safety, security. Well, my daughter has already worked out that Wi-Fi fits into that bottom of that triangle. And without those, well, certainly for her, it would be, the end of the world if she couldn't get onto the internet. But yeah, the interesting other thing about this is that with it being a sort of a 12% chance of it happening, it's maybe a coincidence, I don't know, but it's also a fact that 12% of businessmen wear their ties so tight that it cuts off the blood flow to their heads. That's that's just maybe a coincidence, I don't know, but it's the same statistic.
Right. Okay, working through again, the final one I want to ask you about, and this is a very recent one, is the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. And various theories are around this. One, that it could create a black hole, an artificial black hole that could swallow the Earth. Another is that it could attract asteroids that would smash into the Earth. And the final one is that it would open up a hell dimension, which again seems to come out of a movie plot. CERN, do we need to worry about the Swiss? Are they a bigger risk to mankind than North Korea?
Well, that's a really good question, and I've been reading up about this. And when we think of black holes, obviously we think of black holes on a Hollywood movie scale. But the scientists who've been scratching their heads at this question sort of pointed out that it's a quantum level black hole that it would create. Now, assuming that opening up a sort of a channel to a hell dimension makes me smile, because I suspect that's already been opened based on the fact of what humanity does to each other, on a regular daily basis. I suspect if Satan's here already, if you want to characterize it or in that sense. But you could imagine, okay, let's say Satan is here and he's been directing CERN to create a channel to the hell dimensions. And you imagine the meeting, they've had the project, they've been through the milestones, they're about to sit there and they're about to announce, hey Satan, because he's the CEO, he's going, we're here, and they're going, they felt very excited about this, and maybe that's him. He's on the phone.
Yes.
Wants to know where his black hole is.
Yes.
But I mean, you imagine that meeting. They're all sat around the boardroom, and the guy's there with his PowerPoint presenting it to him, and he's going, "Hey, so Satan, we've done it. We've got the channels, so all your minions can come through." And he's going, "Guys, just 1 minute. I think you might have got the scale a bit wrong." And they're going, "No, Satan. That's not a quantum. That's just a long way away, Satan. It's a long way away. It's not small." You can imagine that's a real palm slap moment when he's going, "Guys, I think you've got the scale wrong. I need something a bit bigger to get my minion armies through." Then I've been in meetings like that with programmers where they've missed something fundamental, and you just go, "Can I just point out something really obvious to you?" So that's kind of, and as for the planets and stuff like that, yeah. I mean, let's face it. There's also a chance that an asteroid's going to smash into us anyway. So whether or not they're doing this, the other interesting thing though is they're planning to build the new Hadron Collider, which is going to be between 80 and 100 kilometres in diameter, compared to the current one, which is 27 kilometres.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe coincidence, I don't know. But the M25, which is largely circular, is 188 kilometres. So how do we not know already that there's a Large Hadron Collider underneath the M25, which is obviously the big orbital motorway that runs around London?
Yeah.
I think the only way that we know that is that nothing travels anywhere near the speed of light on the M25. But, because it's largely a car park.
Well, yes, and those of you who've been caught on the when there's a snarl up on it would definitely be the impression that they're living in a hell dimension on that one. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah. Well, there you go. Proof if you need it. Exactly. In fact, any ring road around any major city, how do we not know already these are not Large Hadron Colliders in place because you've been stuck on it? You're in hell. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Very good point.
Yeah. So, where will you be when the end comes? Do you think you're going to be like the Golgafrinchans in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yes, a telephone sanitizer. That's my new career. I'm developed a new app for sanitizing your telephone from your app. Will I be on the Golgotha? I hope not. Because, well, bearing in mind, if we remember that story played out, that after the telephone sanitizers all left, the rest of that population had a mass extinction event from a virus picked up from telephone.
Yes.
I suppose, will I be on the Ark? I'd like to think I would be on the B Ark, because I'm sure, really, I look back at my career and wonder, have I done anything meaningful? Not ever really sure. I hope to think I might have done something meaningful, but yes, marketing executives, that sort of thing. I think, well, yes. Would I be on the B Ark? You just wonder yourself if they did put all the preppers on the B Ark. Let's say they instead of building their bunkers, they were given the opportunity to get on an ark and travel to another planet where they'd start a new society. Would they go for that? One could argue that they already are planning that. The likes of Mr. Branson and Mr. Musk are trying to sort of get themselves into space. Is that their plan? I don't know. But when we think back to what one of the biggest issues that the members of the B Ark had was when they arrived on their new planet was they made leaves a currency, and then tried to because of the massive problem they had with inflation, they then went on a massive deforestation program to reduce to deal with their currency issue. I think we could very much see that if these individuals do leave the planet, we might actually find ourselves in a slightly better place.
That's brilliant. Rob, as ever, delight talking to you. Speak to you again soon.
And you, Charles.
Find us online at www.urbanfantasist.com or email us at urbanfantasist@icloud.com or follow us on Twitter at urban_fantasist.
And Janie, do you have any other folklore tales you can tell us about the month of September?
How about gemstones? The birthstone for September, and for this month's predominant zodiac sign is Virgo, is the blue sapphire. Back in the 17th century, holding or wearing the sapphire was believed to help you foretell the future. But most importantly, the sapphire was said to be protection against sorcery. It was thought to banish evil spirits, I like this bit, and send negative spells back to the sender. Karma, eh? Sapphires were also once used as protection against poisonous creatures such as spiders, and were said to be able to kill any snakes hiding nearby. And they also apparently cured mental illness, according to this ancient verse. It goes like this: if on your hand this stone you bind, you in Virgo born will find, 'twill cure diseases of the mind. Doesn't exactly scan, does it?
No. Anyway, thanks, Janie. Speak to you again later on in the show. But now, time for some magic. Autumn sees the start of the academic year, a time to return to school, college and university. So I've been digging through my grimoires and books of magic to find a couple of suitable school-type spells, neither of which require you to cast a circle. By way of a health and safety warning, by the way, I've not tried either of these spells, and they do involve lighted candles, so do watch out that you don't leave a lighted flame. The first is called the Study Star, and it's a memory spell which should be cast before you try a study session, and the idea is to help you retain what you're reading about. What you'll need is an orange candle, a sheet of paper, and an orange or yellow marker, and some sage oil. Light the candle near where you are studying. Focus on the candlelight and open up your thoughts to receive new material. On the paper, draw a 7-pointed star. No, we're not talking about a 5-pointed pentagram. Dab a small smudge of the oil in the centre of the star, then fold up the paper into quarters. Rub another bit of oil onto your forehead between your eyes and recite the following words. Open my mind, open my thoughts. Bring to my memories what I need to learn. Hold the ideas, hold the thoughts. Bring to my memory while the candle burns. As you study, keep the paper about you. I possibly use it as a bookmark or keep it in your pocket. And when you've finished your study, blow out the candle. Save the paper and use it with another candle when you start to study again. Just repeat the words each time you do it. Please note, this is really only for assistance of genuine students who are really trying to study. It's not something to use because you've done no homework or studying for the whole year and are now trying to catch up. The second spell I've got for you today is one that can be used to silence gossips, whether they are gossiping behind your back at school or college or on social media and trolling you. It's best performed somewhere private so you can avoid being disturbed. Ideally on a Saturday or under a waning moon. For this you'll need a black candle, some dragon's blood oil or incense to anoint the candle, and either a fire bowl or a cauldron. Anything where it is safe to have a small fire. You'll also need to obtain a tag lock. That's something personal belonging to the gossip who's your enemy in this situation. It could be a strand of their hair, an item of their clothing, a photograph, a piece of paper with their handwriting on, and ideally their name on it. Place the candle and fire bowl on the ground, drawing a pentagram around it. Light the candle and place the tag lock in the fire bowl. Then visualize the gossip as you recite these words. Candle of power, candle so bright, I seek a need to change in your light. I call on the forces higher than I to release the energy that is held inside. If words of cruelty be spoken of me, may it return 3 times 3. If words of hate shall disgrace my name, bring its sender guilt and shame. By the powers of moon and sun, from your lips there shall be none. So mote it be. Then burn the tag lock in the fire bowl. Alternatively, you could burn the tag lock in the candle flame if you don't mind possibly singeing your fingers when they process. There is another version of this spell which you create a poppet, and you can actually buy poppets blank poppets online these days. Open up a seam and place the tag lock inside the poppet. Then, as you recite the same spell, candle of power, candle so bright, you sew a series of stitches across the poppet's mouth to symbolically seal the gossip's lips. Hopefully you won't need to use them, but if you do, please let me know what success you have with them. Now for the first in another new regular feature for Urban Fantasist. We call it Urban Fantasist Goes on Location. We start in Reddenhall. Today it's a village in South Norfolk. If you've ever travelled that area, you probably haven't noticed where the village is, but you will have seen the church. The church is located on top of a hilltop. The tower is massive, 110 feet. The current church was built over a period of 200 years between the 1320s and the 1520s. Walking around the churchyard, you're struck by the number of holly trees, crumbling old tombs, some 300-400 years old, and yew trees in particular. I saw more yew trees in Reddenhall churchyard than in any other churchyard I've ever visited. There's also a very old tomb with rusty iron railings around it. Local legend says that if you run around this particular tomb in an anti-clockwise direction 9 times, you'll summon up the devil. Also located in the churchyard are a number of tombs belonging to the Fuller family. Now the Fullers are interesting because there is a direct connection between the Fullers buried in this churchyard and the Pilgrim Fathers who went across to Plymouth Colony back in 1620 on the Mayflower. The Fullers who went on the Mayflower, Samuel Fuller and his brother Edward, were both born in the parish and were baptised in this very church. Of the Fullers who went on the Mayflower, there was Edward, his wife, and their son, another Samuel, and the Samuel Sr. Sadly, Edward and his wife didn't survive the first winter in America, but the 2 Samuels did. The senior Samuel was a physician and a preacher, and to this day the Fullers are one of 25 families in North America who can still trace their ancestry back to the original Mayflower. Let's go inside the church. One of the first things you'll notice is the organ loft. If you are keen on organs, this one is spectacular. Built by G.M. Holditch in 1843. It hasn't been altered since then, and it's a national treasure. However, what I found most interesting were the carvings on it. 2 very large green man heads. Finding them in an English church might seem a little bit anomalous, given that the green man is a pre-Christian pagan symbol. However, there was in the 19th century a little bit of a revival, and they did start to crop up. However, you do have to ask whether the church's location, because the hilltop is on the Great St. Michael St. Mary ley line, the most famous ley line in the country, if not the most famous ley line in the whole world. You do have to wonder whether there is a little nod towards the pagan origins, as quite clearly this hilltop was used as a site for ritual services in pre-Christian pagan times. What else is in the church? Well, there's 2 tortoises. They are in the edge of the gaudy chapel, and they are on the ends of the stalls. Now, the tortoises are the symbol of the Gaudy family. They were a family of lawyers and merchants who lived nearby Gaudy Hall, and their heyday was the 16th and 17th centuries, the Tudor and Elizabethan and early Stuart periods. They were benefactors of the church, and we'll be coming back to them very shortly. The next thing to mention is the church's lectern. This is made of brass, it is massive, and once again it is spectacular. It's a double-headed eagle, probably the only one of its sort in England, and it's been suggested the only one elsewhere in the world like it is to be found in St. Mark's in Venice. Now we come back to the Gaudies. During the period of the English Revolution, the Puritan Revolution, there was a great move towards stripping out anything that was regarded as popish, anything that was too decorative. There was a character called William Dowsing, best known as William Basher Dowsing. He was a parliamentary commissioner with responsibility for removing all monuments of superstition. These included altars, altar rails, statues, crosses, images. What happened when he was moving to this area is the lectern was removed by the Gaudy family and hidden at the bottom of a moat on their nearby estate. And then, after the end of the Puritan era, the lectern was recovered, cleaned up, and put back in the church. Time now to go urban myth busting. Today's myth has been suggested by one of our listeners, Andrew Jury. Andy, better known in the English music industry as Synth Prof, he's the guy you go to if you've got vintage or analogue musical instruments and synthesizers that need fixing. Andy suggests we peer into the hole to hell. This is a strange story that first emerged in the late 1980s. According to reports, a team of Russian engineers were engaged in drilling a borehole in Siberia. Eventually they got down as far as 9 miles, but then, to their surprise, their drill bits broke through into a cavity. Intrigued by this, they sent down measuring equipment, including a microphone and a thermometer. The thermometer registered a temperature of 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, very, very hot indeed. But it was the microphone's data that caused all the intrigue. For what they heard were the sounds and screams of humans, of people. So, had they somehow drilled so far down, they'd broken in through the roof of hell, and these were the sounds of the damned, the poor tormented souls being tortured for all eternity by Satan's demons? It's an intriguing story, but unfortunately there are a number of problems with the facts. To start with, it wasn't in Siberia, it was in the Kola Peninsula. This may not seem much if you don't know Russia, but it's actually 2,000 miles away and tends to put a question mark over the veracity of the facts. There, talking of facts, they only went down 7.5 miles, not 9 miles. There was also no mysterious cavity. They just drilled and eventually could drill no further. True, it was hot down there, but only 365 degrees Fahrenheit, not 2000 degrees. And what about the noises, the screams? There were none. Nothing was recorded at all. In fact, a subsequent analysis of the original recordings indicated that they came from the soundtrack of a 1972 Maria Brava horror movie called Barren Blood. So it was a fake. This, however, didn't stop the story from travelling. It was picked up by American tabloids. It was picked up by an American religious TV channel, the Trinity Broadcasting Network. And soon it began to spread and became quite a popular urban legend. Intrigued and, in fact, annoyed by this, one Norwegian teacher actually took the measure of putting together a completely fake story, complete with a newspaper clipping, which was actually about an inspector of buildings, with a fake translation, and sending it off to the Trinity Broadcasting Network along with his contact details for verification. To his dismay, Trinity didn't even bother checking the facts or the veracity of the translation. They just went ahead and said further proof that there is a hole to hell in Siberia. Which just goes to show that when you're dealing with very stupid people, satire is completely wasted. So is there a hole to hell? No, there's not. There was a movie on that subject a couple of years ago called 9 Miles Down. I think it went straight to video in the UK, but that's it. Another myth busted. So here is Urban Fantasist's top 10 Doomsday scenarios. We start at number 10 with famine. It's the thing that mankind has been worrying about the most and still is an issue in many parts of the world, particularly where drought is also involved. At number 9, and we're very much into the four horsemen of the apocalypse here, we have war. One of the ironies of civilization is that the moment people started getting together, other groups of people started attacking them to get hold of what they'd got. Today, war has been given an added doomsday dimension by the prospect of nuclear holocausts. No mentioning North Korea then. At number 8 we have pestilence. Today we tend to be concerned about things like Ebola and whether the antibiotics we have today will be able to cope with upcoming pandemics. However, in years gone by, it was typhus, typhoid, and of course plague. The Black Death, for example, wiped out nearly 70% of some parts of Europe. Coming in at number 7, we have religious doomsdays. I'm sure many listeners are familiar with the Christian concept of the apocalypse. However, almost all major religions, belief systems and mythologies have some form of doomsday scenario. The Vikings, the Norse, have a particularly grim one in which not only does all of mankind perish in Ragnarok, but even the gods die, either fighting each other or being eaten by a very large wolf. Number 6, we have a breakdown of society. Civil war, strife, collapse of social values, revolution. One of the more recent manifestations is a suggestion that if the sun were to give out a solar flare, it would fry all our electronics, creating an electromagnetic pulse and pretty much kill the whole computer digital world we live in, which would certainly be the end of the world for many people as far as they were concerned. Number 5, cosmic events. Asteroids, comets, once again big flares by the sun. Will we collide with Mars? Again, it's an issue that's been worrying mankind for a long time, since they first spotted large comets rushing through the sky. In at number 4 we have extreme climate change. Appreciate that the concept of global warming is still controversial in some areas. Is it caused by mankind? Is it a short-term trend? Is it a longer-term trend? However, it's worth remembering that the last great ice age effectively emptied the northern hemisphere of all civilization. It's also worth bearing in mind that extreme climate change could be caused by some entirely different factors, such as a supervolcano eruption, perhaps at Yellowstone Park. While not directly related to the climate, the impact of such a huge eruption would destroy the ecosystem, would destroy agriculture, would turn our weather systems upside down. Number 3, this really goes back to the 1930s when Orson Welles did his famous Mars Attacks spoof radio show, Attack by Aliens. Well, they must be out there somewhere, and one day they're going to find us. We just have to wait and see. Number 2, also rather in the realms of science fiction, the rise of the machines, artificial intelligence, robots. Will they really take over? Will we really find ourselves in a Terminator situation? Finally, coming in at number 1, black holes. This is a relatively new one and has been prompted by concerns about the research being done at CERN. Will the scientists there accidentally create a black hole that swallows the Earth? So there we have it, our top 10. I know, you're asking, what, no zombie holocausts? Well, you do know they're fictional monsters. And if they aren't, well, I think items 8, 7 and 6, pestilence, religious doomsday and breakdown of society, adequately describe those. Sweet dreams.
You're listening to Urban Fantasist with Charles Christian on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Time now for some legal news, not so much folklore, L-O-R-E, as folklore, L-A-W. See what I did there? It's just been announced that a judge has ruled that the $900 million lawsuit against Warner Brothers over the Conjuring movies series, which includes the current movie Annabelle, can go ahead and is set for trial in April 2018. The case was brought by author Gerald Brittle, who wrote a book in 1980 called The Demonologist, which was about Ed and Lorraine Warren, the real-life paranormal investigators who are the protagonists in the Conjuring series. Brittle says when he wrote the book, the Warrens gave him exclusive rights to his stories and that no one could create a competing work based on their lives. Warners have subsequently signed up with Lorraine Warren for the Conjuring series, and Brittle says Warren didn't have the right to do this because she'd already assigned the rights to him. It's been a complicated legal dispute so far, with Warner saying that disputing Brittle's claims. However, one of the key elements which is going to be coming out in the court case is Warner's claims that nobody can own the rights of historical facts. However, Brittle has fought back, saying that we're not talking about historical facts because ghosts don't exist, and that most of the stories featured were made up by the Warrens, so are in the realms of fiction. This presumably means that sometime next year we're going to have to see Warner Brothers in court trying to produce evidence that demonic possessed dolls really do exist. So, expensive lawsuit there. On a rather cheaper end of the legal scale, have you ever wondered how much it costs to impersonate a ghost? This was a question a court in Portsmouth, England had to discuss earlier this summer when they were dealing with a youth who'd been arrested for impersonating a ghost. He'd been staggering around a churchyard with his arms out in front of him saying, woo, 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 woo. Not so much impersonating a ghost as impersonating one of the villains out of Scooby-Doo. Well, it may have been funny for the youth in question and his friends, but families who were visiting the churchyard tending the graves of their loved ones were less impressed, and so he was arrested. He was subsequently charged with using threatening or abusive words and behaviour likely to cause distress, and fined a total of £75, or about $100. And now we're back urban myth busting. The destination this time is Great Yarmouth on the Norfolk coast, and we're looking at the legends relating to the Britannia statue, variously known as the Norfolk Naval Pillar, Nelson's Monument and the Britannia Monument. It was erected in 1817 as a memorial to England's great naval champion, Lord Nelson, and at the top is a figure of Britannia. However, Britannia is not appearing out towards the North Sea, as you might expect, which would be where Nelson's traditional enemies would have been coming from. Instead, Britannia is pointing inland. This gave birth to the legend that when the architect saw that the statue was pointing the wrong direction, he was so desperate that he threw himself from the top of the tower and fell to his death. So, true or false? False, I'm afraid. The sculpture at the top was always intended to face inland, pointing in the direction of Nelson's birthplace. As for the death, well, there was it, but it was actually the borough surveyor, Thomas Sutton, who climbed to the top of the monument and promptly had a heart attack and died. For those of you who like these kind of statistics, the monument is 144 feet high, compared with 169 feet for the well-known Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square. The top, however, is accessible by means of a flight of some 217 steps. Incidentally, there is another little legend that has grown up. The first custodian of this monument was a certain able seaman James Sharman. He was a Norfolk man and also a member of the crew of the Victory, and one of those who actually carried Nelson below decks after he was shot. Later in life, he helped rescue the crew of a sinking ship just off the Yarmouth coast, and sometime later encountered a young writer called Charles Dickens. Dickens was so enamoured by his tales that it's reckoned that he based the character Ham Peggotty in David Copperfield upon him. Well, it's almost midnight, the witching hour, and as we've had a number of stories about Doomsday and predictions of the apocalypse this evening, how about we end the show with the weird but true and distinctly grim story of a witch called Mary Bateman and the Prophet Hen of Leeds.
A hen? Really? Great. There's nothing I like more than a late-night tale involving psychic chickens.
Right, Janie. Here's the tale of Mary Bateman, the Yorkshire witch, and her psychic chicken. Mary was born in 1768 in North Yorkshire and pretty soon progressed into a life of petty theft, and then becoming a bit of a con woman, a charlatan. She claimed she had supernatural powers, and then she, by the end of the century, was a fortune teller in Leeds and was selling potions to keep off evil spirits. Her greatest hoax was the Prophet Hen of Leeds, where, to the amazement of people paying money to see the pun there, the chicken would lay eggs that contained the phrase "Christ is coming" written on them. Naturally, people thought that this was a sign of Doomsday. However, it was soon discovered that Bateman had been using acid to etch the message on the shell of the egg and then had been reinserting the eggs back into the hen's oviduct. So not just a bad witch, but also a cruel to animals witch. It was also in 1806 that Bateman was approached by a rather gullible couple called William and Rebecca Perigo, who believed they'd been put under a spell and that Rebecca's chest pains were a result of the spell. Naturally, Bateman had a solution by means of using a friend of hers who had magical powers. Now, his friend lived supposedly in Scarborough, and Bateman would act as an intermediary, and providing the Perigos provided her with certain items such as gold sovereigns, paper money, silver spoons, china, crockery, food, various items of that nature. she would contact her friend in Scarborough, who would send back appropriate spells and recommendations of how to treat the condition. One of the charms the supposed friend in Scarborough sent back were a series of linen bags which had to be suspended under the perigo's bed. This went on for 2 years. Eventually, Bateman started supplying the perigos with a special pudding. The husband was unable to eat more than a spoonful before being violently sick. However, Rebecca ate the whole lot, and you'll not be surprised to learn subsequently died from arsenic poisoning. The authorities were called, they investigated, they searched the witch's home, Mary Bateman's home. They soon discovered that all the items that supposedly had been sent to the friend in Scarborough were all in Mary Bateman's home. There was no friend in Scarborough. They also examined the magical spell pouches that the perigos had been supplied with, and you'll not be surprised to learn they contained nothing more than bits of old paper and lettuce leaves. In due course, Mary was charged with murder and found guilty of fraud and murder at York, sentenced to death, and subsequently hung. Her conviction also included the proviso that upon death her body would be handed over to the local hospital for anatomy, which was a fairly common practice in these days, and it was an equally fairly common practice that the anatomy of hanged people was carried out in public, and in fact several hundred people were willing to pay threepence a time to see Mary's body being sliced up by trainee surgeons. Somewhere in the process, strips of her skin were tanned and turned into leather and sold as magical charms to ward off evil spirits, which is kind of ironic considering Mary herself had spent most of her life selling bogus charms to more gullible people. And amazingly, Mary's skeleton was still on public display in a medical museum in Leeds until 2015. So that was Mary Bateman, the Yorkshire witch, although in her case, she was actually just a charlatan, and her activities give witchcraft a bad name. Well, that's all we have time for tonight. I'd like to thank our guest, Rob Lancashire. Rob, incidentally, when we were off air, reminded me of Terry Pratchett's Field Test for Insanity, which Pratchett writes about in his Discworld novel Masquerade. Pratchett says it's when you're dealing with somebody, the increased number of exclamation marks they use, from 1 to 5, indicates their increased separation from reality, with that 5 exclamation marks being an infallible indicator that the person you're dealing with is someone who wears their underpants on their head. Good tip, Rob, I'll remember that one. We're back on Thursday the 21st of September, when we'll be having stories on legends and folklore relating to Maybon, harvest festivals, the autumnal equinox and harvest home, and we'll also have a session on why everything you know about fighting werewolves is wrong. I'm Charles Christian. Thank you for listening.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon. Which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to Urban Fantasist with Charles Christian, your fortnightly fix of weird tales, urban legends, magic and folklore. Keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com, by email to urbanfantasist@icloud.com, and on Twitter at urban_fantasist. Good night. Join us again in 2 weeks' time for another edition of Urban Fantasist.